Well, I've got Larry back here today. I've been promising all week that we'd be doing this. And so this is now Saturday, the day after Cathie, our buddy, our friend. We all like Cathie, right? Does anybody put in the comments below if you don't like Cathie or if you think she's almost always wrong? Anyway, Larry and I like Cathie. We think she's very wise. And so we watch her on Friday night, the day that the employment numbers come out. And we take some notes and we make some decisions with regard to what Cathie said, and we try to amplify and talk about it in more general terms that we think might be valuable to you. So Larry, thank you again for coming on this month and taking Cathie apart. No, we're not going to take Cathie apart. We're going to amplify.
Well, I will say that, I don't buy everything that Cathie sells. And that's almost a literal truth because, I invest in some of her funds,
Me too.
particularly for my grandchildren. So all of their accounts have got good position in her funds because I think there's a lot of opportunity and promise there. And again, that's not a short-term,
Right.
That's not a short-term play. But yeah, I think that her economic analysis is superb, probably the best that I've heard, and I don't remember when she's been significantly wrong.
Yeah,
It's saying something.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you look at what she's saying now and compared to what she was saying months ago. And, she's one of the reasons I guess I like her so much is because and this is one of the things I keyed on in her talk last night, because she's such a big believer in productivity. And I am also. I have a theory that in my mind is that productivity is inversely related to, is directly related, equal sign to wealth. The more productivity in a company, the more productivity in a household, the more productivity in a country, the more productivity in the world, the wealthier that entity, whatever it is going to be. And, it's pretty easy to show it. I mean, you got two workers standing next to each other and one of them works twice as fast as the other one. Well, when the time comes for layoffs, which one's going to go home first? So, and it just goes across the board like that. So she mentioned, Larry, that productivity is increasing. We know that the productivity numbers will be out. I don't think it's this week. I think it's the following week. Following week. But the productivity numbers last month were terrific. It was a complete reversal from a negative to a positive and a strong positive. And I've spent program after program after program talking about productivity. But I think I know that you're very nervous. Cathie's very nervous about a coming recession. My saving grace, I believe, that makes me believe maybe not, is because the productivity numbers are, I think, just going to get stronger and stronger. Thoughts?
You may be right. I'll just give you one elemental word of warning. When there's a downturn, productivity generally spikes up at first. So beware of that. I mean, I'm not sure we're looking at that now. And, it's possible that we are seeing an increase in productivity. And a lot of that may have to do with a fairly significant investment round, that we've seen in the past year and a half, two and a half years. I mean, the trillions that the government printed actually did some good.
Yeah.
There's been some significant investment, but whether or not the productivity increase we're seeing is going to be sustained is still an open question, and I'd reserve judgment for a while.
So my theory on the productivity, I don't know if you've seen my videos on this, but my theory, if I could say it in 45 seconds, is that productivity in the COVID era dropped off the map.
Good.
You can't be highly productive when all you're doing is chasing your tail, trying to make sure you have enough employees, trying to make sure that you can get the thing shipped if you if you can find it anywhere in the world, and then you want to get it shipped, and then you can't get it shipped at a price that you can afford, and then you get it in and you're not sure you've got a customer for it because that part of the market now is dropped. You can't manage your inventories because you don't know when your supply is going to come or not going to come. I mean, all of those things are productivity issues. And so if you're the number one example I use is your HR department. Now, most people don't think of an HR department as having anything to do with productivity, but in fact, it is expensive to hire and train. That is a huge expense in the life of an employee at a company. But if that employee comes in, if first of all, if it takes you 3 times the expense to find the employee, and then they don't even show up for work the first day, or you hire them and they work for a week and they immediately go off to a better opportunity the next week, or you get them for 3 months and they go off for another opportunity, the productivity on that entire department just goes through the floor. Now it's all settling down. People are not quitting their jobs. People are not they're not transferring to get that better job anymore. There's a tremendous difference in terms of the productivity of that HR department. Now multiply that across every single department in the company. That's kind of, so therefore we should see the productivity numbers year over year, not month over month, but year over year, comparing to a year ago. Those productivity numbers, I believe, will continue to be very, very solid.
Right, but you're not comparing it to a great situation.
That's true.
So, my concern is a macro concern. I think this Fed has handled the situation. Firstly, the administration and the prior administration, both Republicans and Democrats since COVID, have printed an enormous amount of money. And we are only beginning to feel the negative impacts of that over time. I mean, one of the problems of productivity is that when you've got so much money in your pocket, you don't have to work, productivity goes to hell. So we also have to put up with what I think has been an extremely poorly managed Fed.
You're not saying that with nearly the intensity and passion that you said it to me in the green room.
I'm just building up. I'm just getting started. I mean, I would put this guy into prison. I would lock him up and throw the key away. He waited too long, and now he's going too far. I mean, the worst possible set of actions. I mean, to allow inflation to get to that point before you take action, and then to take action way beyond the time when it's evident to a blind person that,
So Larry, can we take an example? Because sometimes it's better in helping people to see something. So the number one thing that the Fed looks at in terms of the inflationary spiral is housing. And the number one thing that they care about in housing is rents.
Yeah.
And he said in his last report, Powell said, look, we know rents are flat. There's plenty of reports out there. It doesn't take a genius to see that rents are flat. They've been flat for 9 months. Now that doesn't show up in the the PCE or the CPI yet, and he says it's a lagging indicator. We won't see it yet.
But why is he saying it? Why is he saying it? Because we've been shouting at him from the rooftops, idiot, you're not looking at the right numbers. And now they're starting to look at the numbers and they're admitting it. But nonetheless,
still my place.
I mean, if we miss a recession, it will be by God's grace. I'm serious. I mean, and if we go into a recession now, it can be very, very dangerous. very dangerous. I
So
mean,
what kind of recession are you talking about, Larry? You and I have been through, I think, 9 recessions, if I remember right. I think it's 9 now, if you count COVID.
Actually, I've been through a few more because I grew up in South Africa.
Oh, okay.
I ran, first half of my business career was in South Africa, and so we had many more recessions than.
Okay, yeah. So you've seen them multiple times. So, but there's different kinds of recessions. So there's recessions where the ones that I hate the most are when there's no money, when the money just stops. And so the retailer can't pay the wholesaler can't pay the manufacturer can't pay his suppliers of the raw materials, the OEMs. And it just stops. And there's no way to get it started again. That's to me, the worst kind of recession. There's recessions where it's just, there's a slowdown. The consumer, I think Cathie thinks that's what's going to happen, that the consumer is going to go on strike. They're 70% of the economy. She thinks the consumer is going on strike. They're not buying durables. They're not buying the big ticket items. And she thinks that's where we're going to see going off the cliff. There's all kinds of recessions. What do you think is going to, what do you think is going to be the problem I know the one that's being talked about, just to bring one more up, the one that's being talked about is that corporations next year are going to have to refinance their debt. And it's going to go from like 3-4% up to like 8-9-10%. And that's going to be and they won't be able to pass along the increase in their pricing. Thoughts?
Every recession has a different set of characteristics. Because there are so many inputs and outputs in an economy, and that they're all interrelated, and when things get out of whack, it's really hard to tell which is going to be the whack, what's going to hit. Inflation went very wild for a while, and there's still this gigantic Federal Reserve Bank balance sheet. There's this gigantic overhang of federal debt. The budget's gone crazy. If you look at the Japanese recession, that's lasted several decades now. That recession was, as a result of just this dramatic spike in property prices, this gigantic amount of money that went into property, printing of the yen. The yen, as a result, when the recession came, the government printed so much money. Now they owe multiple times their
GDP.
And so they're in this long, morose process of trying to dig out, and they're actually digging in deeper. That's the thing I fear the most for the US. Now, we're unlike the Japanese. We used to encourage immigration. Somehow immigration always happens, even though we have these forces that try and stop it and try and put an end to it and so on. And we have this unique situation where people are streaming across the uncontrolled borders rather than coming into immigration through the so-called normal channels. But immigration saved us, or may save us from the Japanese situation. But on the other hand, this debt, we don't know. The world has never seen the situation that we're in now, where the sort of reserve currency of the world is building this gigantic debt, pile, and a lot of the world is wishes to turn away from the dollar economy, but may not be able to. So, we're in uncharted territory. It would be difficult for me to characterize the recession that may come. Cathie's pretty much, she's much wiser than I am, and she has a much better grounding in economics than I do. She's very good at economics, and she also has a finger on a lot more numbers than I have. Right. But I have a really unsettled feeling in in my
in your,
in
yeah.
just what I'm sensing, and when I get that way, generally it's not a good sign.
So she points to one number that is kind of new to me. I mean, she talks about it, frequently. So that's how I knew about it previously. But she talks about the GDP versus the GDI. And the GDP, we all know what the GDP is, gross domestic product, and that reports income from all sources. And she says it tends to be not as good in the short term. It's more of a long-term number. She says that more reliable is the GDI, and the GDI difference, I'm sorry, I'm going to probably get it wrong now. The GDI reports income from all sources. I'm sorry, where the GDP is only business income and business. Is that correct? Am I getting it right?
No, it's all income plus imports less plus exports less imports.
Right. And whereas the GDI is all income from all sources.
Right.
Okay. She says that's more reliable in the short term as a predictor of where the economy is going. And she says that the largest gap in this number has been 2.5, a gap of 2.5
Right.
between the two. And she says right now we're at that 2.5. And this gap has happened like in 2007. It's happened in other situations where we've been just on the cusp of something really bad. Now she says also, though, that the GDP numbers have been horrible, not horrible in terms of what the numbers are, but horrible in the reporting. Over the last months, the government has been having to revise them down over and over and over again. The government are they just worse at getting their numbers together now? What's going on with the government? The same thing's happening on the employment numbers. They report 300,000, and then next month they take off 100,000. Then the next month they take off another 50,000. What's going on?
It's not unusual at a point of turn in the economy, because what happens is that the estimates that they make use historic numbers, and they look at historic trends, and there's a memory of those trends in their forecasted numbers. And really the monthly numbers and the quarter end numbers are as much a forecast based upon early numbers that they get, and then they adjust that for reality 2 or 3 or 4 months later. So what happens is the algorithm is always wrong. The question is, how far wrong is it when there's a turn in whether we're in a downward trend or an upward trend. Now, what I've described is just the very general reason for this phobia, this number phobia of theirs. And so the more the numbers are based upon predictors rather than actual readings, the more likely is that there's going to be revisions. And the higher likelihood there's going to be a revision when you turn from growth into decline, or when you turn from decline into growth. If you go back and look at their GDP numbers every time the economy's turned, you'll see that that they've always had to make bigger and bigger adjustments. That's why I'm very worried about the current circumstances.
Because this has been 7 months in a row that they've been reducing the numbers month after month, consistently, always in the same direction. It's always lower, the GDP and the employment numbers.
And if you go back 3 or 4 months, that's really when the turn happened, and that's when they kept on ratcheting up the interest rates, and I kept on saying, no, stop, this is the time to stop. And I think we were 3 months late, and I think we went one too far. And I think we're in for a very hard landing.
So is there so the CPI comes out in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Then we have this Fed meets in 3. I think it's 3 weeks. Anyway, nobody thinks they're going to raise at that meeting. would it be helpful if the Fed was slightly more dovish in that meeting? Would that help the economy a little to at least send a signal that maybe they're done, even if they don't think they're going to lower it, that at least they're done?
I think they're too late. I think the only thing they can do is at that meeting say, you know what, it looks like we may have to raise rates in the near term. That would be a very good thing for them to do, but I think we're a little too late. I think.
You think they should say they're going to raise in the near term?
I mean, sorry, they're going to drop it.
Okay,
Sorry.
okay. I'm glad we straightened that one out.
Yeah, so that would be my druthers.
What about the restrictive aspect? Cathie really came down hard on restrictive. She said the fact that he mentioned that several times. So restrictive can have to do with the credit, can have to do with the actual interest rate.
Mm-hmm.
I look at the restrictive more in terms of reducing money supply, and keeping the regional banks not lending and having to lend at high prices. So if they stopped if they started quantitatively easing, or at least not quantitatively
tightening,
yeah.
Tightening. Look, the quantitative tightening is a lever they've got. They can ease up or even ease. That's certainly true. They can't really ease because their balance sheet situation is quite bad. I guess they could make it. I mean, Japan's got Japan's Federal Reserve Bank is like, it's just a paper mountain. So maybe they could, but I would, if I were the Federal Reserve government. I mean, we had this program a little while ago, which I'm sure nobody watched, all about the Federal Reserve's the governor's statement at the Aspen, not the Aspen, at the Jackson Hole.
Oh, yes.
And I was very critical of his tenor.
Yes.
I think that he should have changed his tenor at that meeting. Even if he said, look, we're not going to ease, but we see that we've been very successful and we've definitely reached a point where we think that, while we may not be at the actual 2.22% rate of inflation, the downward trend is such that we're going to be there anyway. So, let's declare victory, and we'll judge whether we can loosen up if things, drop any further. That would have been the right signal. If I were to typify the collapse that's coming, I would say that your point about private company or public company debt would be a very serious point. Look, there's some public companies that are not going to be able to make payments on their debt.
Yes.
That could precipitate, a run on the stock market, which could have, very serious repercussions. It could have very serious repercussions for a lot of banks that own a lot of the debt. And that could trigger something. So we need this government, this Federal Reserve Bank, to take a step back, and we need the government to the government has to stop political spending. It's hard in a political season, but
it is hard in a political season. But I've been saying for a long time, and this is not even, I don't even mean this as a partisan. So, I could easily be partisan in this. And, I don't make a secret that I'm not a fan of Biden. And he's probably not capable maybe of doing this at this time because of his health. But there's such a thing as leadership. And sometimes you have to get up and you have to say what you're thinking about in terms of where the economy is going, where you'd like to see it going, why you believe that the economy can recover. What, you need to maybe say something about Saudi Arabia trying to destroy the economy by only pumping 5 million barrels of oil a day instead of the 8 million they normally do, which caused the price of oil to spike again on Friday by another $2. Which that could be the nail in the coffin.
Yeah, but he can't talk about Saudi Arabia
I
because
know.
he's really teed off the ruler of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. So you got yourself stuck where you don't have any leadership. So if the leader isn't setting a course, then the economy is kind of, where just going wherever it can go, given its own inclinations at any given time. And then if you
And is it me, or is Janet Yellen also showing her age? Seriously, I've listened to her in recent, and she generates such pablum. It's just, happy talk. Anyway.
Yep. Yeah. It's so what we're looking at here is Cathie Wood thinks that we're going to have a harder landing, maybe even a hard landing. You're very nervous. You're saying your gut is telling you the things are kind of rough. I'm very worried. My biggest concern is definitely over cash and credit, whether companies will be able to borrow as they need to. Yes, it's possible the consumer could go on strike. There is a lot of talk from Friday, Larry, that in the numbers that we saw, we had a tremendous number of people coming back into the labor force. And that could be people who have now run through their savings that they had accumulated, even though Bank of America says they have plenty to last them until next year, until the end of next year. But they could be getting down to the place where it's like, okay, buddy, you got to go back to work. You need to go back to work. We need the cash. You've had plenty of vacation. Now it's time to get back. Are people taking second jobs? But if that is the case, then that could actually be a stimulus if you get those people back into the job force.
Well, yeah, but I mean, their spending is going to go down. I mean, they're not going to spend more even if they get a job. They're going to tend to want to save significantly.
Savings down to 3.5. Yeah.
We all know that there are so many different there are so many different inputs into the economy, and it's very difficult to balance, and understand the balance and figure out the balance. But I think we should all recognize that the government that the Federal Reserve Bank has been steering the economy based upon a very, very long view in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, exactly.
And they've been very blind to the reality, and that's not good for any of us, and it's certainly not good for the people who went through this up and down in the pandemic, which was, terribly mishandled by the government and the Federal Reserve Bank, and terribly mishandled, by, all the people that actually we rely upon. And so it's going to be tough one way or the other. So
I think it's always good to end every conversation on this channel with something about Tesla. And I think I'll say, and maybe you'll have a thought on this, it is rare. And I think you could probably count on two hands the number of major companies out there that are even close to being as well positioned for a recession, even a hard landing, as Tesla.
That's
with
true.
$24 billion in the bank, and cash equivalents, with no debt, with plenty of capacity, plenty of ability to shift, plenty of new markets to open. I mean, that's what I always used to do, Larry. I was in a seasonal business my entire life, in the bicycle business. And so we would always bring out our products in October, new products in October, and fill the pipeline in October, November, December, because they had to buy them if they were going to be competitive. And that's the only way, sometimes that's the only way we made it through the winter, was introducing new products. So Tesla has just introduced a new product. They've got another new product coming out next week or sometime this month. And they have a huge potential for generating a pipeline fill at exactly the time that they need it if we're in fact going to have a recession.
Earlier today, I was at the Tesla lithium plant.
Oh yeah. Oh, tell us.
Yeah. And it's man, they're a building. I mean, they got concrete rising up from the ground. I mean, they've got the footings down. They're a building, and it's a big site. I got warned off by security.
Oh no.
It's an interesting interface. Yeah, but it's looking pretty damn good. They're probably a year and a half away from completion, but man, they're a building. So they've obviously got their factory designed. It's in the middle of nowhere. I mean, nowhere. But look, I couldn't agree with you more. They've got, 20 billion plus in the bank. They didn't listen to everybody who screamed at them to buy back shares, which was, I think, would have been the worst strategy, the bottom of the pile strategy. Elon is very focused on where the economy is going, how he's going to get Tesla through a tough period of time, the amount of money they're going to have to put into all these projects they have. He did the right thing at the right time, as he always does, and he goes right against the, I won't call them the sheep because some of those sheep are quite wise, but he's beyond, so they're very well positioned for a recession, but they're also very well positioned if we don't have a recession. So I think they're a great company, and I think they have a great leadership, and I think they have a great board of directors and a great management. So I'm all in.
Okay, all right. Well, Larry, as you progress on your trip, you need to keep us up to date, and we'll have to do some other road videos with you as you're in various places and learn things. Maybe you might do some original reporting. It's entirely possible.
It's not what I do. It's not what I
You're not going to stand out, count the number of
no,
packs that are going out at Lathrop? No.
Yeah. No, a lot of people do that. It's not what I do. I like to get my eyes on what they're doing. I did see the Hyundai and Kia factories yesterday. I went, through Alabama, and I went through South Carolina, saw the BMW plant, which I used to visit quite frequently. I had business with them, and I saw Hyundai and the Kia plant. But we'll talk about that. There's a lot of time to talk about that. So
great. Well, thank you again, Larry, for coming and helping us illuminate or go beyond what Cathie Wood had to say. And I'm sure that the Fed is listening, and you guys are going to be all over the place next week giving talks, you Fed leaders. So could you soften it up a little bit? Listen to Larry and me and soften up the tone just a little bit next week. That'd be great. Thanks again, Larry.
Thank you, Randy.
And for all of you out there, it has been great talking to you.